I didn't know my life was about to split cleanly in two because of the sound of someone pounding on my apartment door at 9 a.m. on a Sunday. Like the building was on fire. I was half asleep, hair a mess, sheets tangled around my legs. The kind of morning where the air feels heavy with leftover champagne and regret. Tara was in my bathroom, bare feet on tile, the faint hiss of the shower starting, her voice humming something soft like she belonged there. Then the pounding came again. Not a polite knock, not a neighbor, not a delivery. A furious, relentless thud, thud, thud that made my stomach drop before my brain could catch up. I shuffled to the door in an old sweatshirt, blinking hard, and the moment I cracked it open, Evan pushed past me. My ex, my boyfriend of 5 years, the man I'd built a home with, planned weekends with, imagined a ring from. His cheeks were red, hair wind-tossed, eyes sharp and wet, like he'd been crying and sprinting at the same time. He didn't even look at me at first. He looked past me, into my apartment, like he was hunting for proof. "Where is she?" he shouted. My mouth went dry. "Evan, what are you talking about?" He pointed, shaking. "Where's Tara?" And just like that, the air changed. The living room that had been quiet and ordinary a second ago suddenly felt staged, like a scene in a movie where everyone knows their lines except the person standing in the middle. Behind me, the bathroom door clicked open. Tara stepped out, towel wrapped around her hair, eyes wide but not surprised, almost ready. Evan's voice broke into something raw. "I can't believe you." Tara lifted her chin. "I didn't do anything wrong." Evan laughed, sharp and ugly. "You didn't do anything wrong? You've been whispering in my ear for months. You made me doubt her. You made me leave." My heart started pounding so hard it hurt. I looked from Evan to Tara, searching their faces like one of them would explain the last 6 weeks, how my stable 5-year relationship collapsed, how I ended up with his coworker in my bed, how fast grief can turn into something that looks like moving on. And the worst part? Somewhere deep down, a quiet voice inside me whispered that none of this was an accident. If you'd asked me 2 months earlier what my life looked like, I would have said boring in the best way. I was 29, working in sales at a software company where my weeks were measured in quotas, client calls, and the occasional win that made my boss slap my shoulder like I'd just scored a goal. I liked the pace. I liked the certainty. If you put in the work, you could usually predict the outcome. And then there was Evan. Evan was 30, worked in marketing at a tech startup, and had the kind of steady charm that didn't scream for attention, but drew it anyway. He listened. He remembered details. When I talked about a hard day, he didn't just say, "That sucks." He'd ask what part felt the heaviest. He made me feel seen, not in some grand, cinematic way, in the everyday way that actually matters. We met at a charity run 5 years ago, one of those weekend events where everyone pretends they're athletes for a cause. I'd shown up alone, hair in a ponytail, wearing an old race tee from college. Evan was there with a few friends, stretching like he took it seriously. I remember noticing his laugh first, easy, unforced, before I noticed his face. He offered me water after the run because I looked like I might collapse. I made a joke about dying for charity, and he laughed. And somehow we were walking to coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. From there, it was simple. Dates turned into routines. Routines turned into, "This is my person." We moved in together after about a year. And by year 2, we had the kind of life people post about when they're trying to prove they're happy, except ours didn't need proving. A nice apartment downtown, not extravagant, but bright, clean, with windows that caught sunset the way I liked. We hiked most weekends when the weather was decent. Sunday nights were our thing, cooking together, music playing softly, Evan stealing bites off the cutting board while I tried to pretend I wasn't smiling. We meal prepped for the week. We argued about dumb stuff, whether the dishwasher was loaded correctly, whether we needed 16 different kinds of hot sauce, and always found our way back to each other. Our families were present in the background like supporting characters. Evan's parents lived about 2 hours away. We drove out once a month, sat at their table, ate too much, listened to his dad talk about the good old days. His mom hugged me longer than necessary, like she'd already decided I belonged. My parents lived overseas. Every other week, Evan and I would video call them, and I'd watch my mom's face soften when she saw him. She'd tell him he looked too thin. He'd promised to eat more. It was domestic in a way that made me feel safe. We even had the same friend group from college. Weekend brunches, birthdays, random nights out. People thought we were solid. People used words like goals. People assumed engagement was inevitable. And last June, it almost was. We'd been on a hike, sweaty and happy, sitting on a rock overlooking a valley. Evan said casually, like he was mentioning the weather, "Do you ever think about getting engaged?" My chest had warmed in that quiet way, a kind of yes that didn't need fireworks. I said, "Yeah, I do." He squeezed my hand. "Me too." After that, the idea sat between us like a promise. Not rushed, not pressured, just waiting for the right season. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that while I was picturing a ring and a ski trip and a future, something else was beginning to form at the edges of our life. A shift so small at first I mistook it for stress, a change in Evan's tone, a distance in his eyes. And a third person, someone I'd met only in passing at office parties, quietly stepping closer, smiling like a friend while she planted doubt like seeds. Her name was Tara, and she didn't come into my life loudly. She came in through the cracks. The first thing that changed wasn't dramatic. It was timing. Evan started coming home later than usual in late August. Not hours later, just enough that dinner would go cold before he walked through the door. His keys would jingle, his shoes would land by the mat, and he'd say, "Sorry, work ran long," in a voice that sounded practiced. Not guilty, just distant. At first, I believed him without question. His job was demanding. Marketing deadlines, last-minute campaigns, startup chaos. I'd seen him stressed before. This didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like adulthood. But then he stopped asking about my day. Not entirely. Just enough that I noticed the absence. I'd tell him about a difficult client call or a tense meeting, and he'd nod, distracted, scrolling through his phone or staring at nothing in particular. His didn't land where it used to. Weekends shifted too. When I suggested hikes, he said he needed time alone. When I planned a day trip, he hesitated, said he was tired, that he needed space to think. Space. That word started to show up more often, like a quiet warning label I didn't know how to read yet. He spent more time in the bedroom with the door closed, not hiding, just separate. I could hear the faint click of his laptop, the low murmur of podcasts or calls I wasn't part of. I'd stand in the kitchen, spoon in hand, listening, wondering when our shared life had started to feel like parallel lines. I asked him, gently, carefully, if something was wrong. He'd smile, tired but reassuring. "Work's just busy. I've got a lot on my mind." And because he'd never given me a reason not to trust him, I believed that too. The thing is, when you trust someone completely, you don't interrogate the gaps. You fill them with love. So I adjusted. I waited. I tried to be lighter, easier, less demanding. I told myself this was just a phase. Then Tara appeared. It started with a message in early September, my phone buzzing on a Wednesday afternoon while I was still at work. "Tara, hey, this is awkward, but I was wondering if we could talk about Evan." My stomach tightened. Tara worked in the same department as Evan. I'd met her maybe 10 times over the years. Holiday parties, company mixers. She was friendly, polished, always smiling like she had good intentions. We'd never talked one-on-one before. I hesitated before replying, but by then, the unease in my chest had grown heavy enough that curiosity outweighed caution. We met for coffee near my office. She ordered a latte. I got black coffee, barely tasting it. She asked how things were going with Evan, her voice careful, concerned. I said we were fine, but he seemed stressed. She looked down at her cup, swirling the foam like she was choosing her words. Then she said it. "Evan's been talking to me at work about your relationship." The room seemed to tilt slightly. She told me Evan was unsure about marriage, that he loved me, but wasn't sure he wanted to spend the rest of his life with one person, that he felt overwhelmed by expectations. "There's no one else," she said quickly. "I just didn't want you to be blindsided." Her hand reached across the table and touched mine, warm, steady, sympathetic. "I hope you don't tell him I told you," she added softly. "He'd be really upset." I agreed, my head buzzing, my chest tight like something precious had just cracked. I drove around for an hour before going home that night, circling blocks, replaying her words, trying to understand how a relationship that felt solid could be quietly unraveling without my consent. That night, I tried harder. I suggested a new Italian place Evan had mentioned once. He said he was tired and ordered takeout instead. Over the next few weeks, I planned elaborate dates, rooftop dinners, concert tickets, a weekend at a bed and breakfast upstate. Evan went along with everything, but his smile never quite reached his eyes. "And Tara?" She kept messaging. Little updates, little warnings. "She feels smothered." She's overwhelmed. She doesn't know what she wants. Each message landed like a pebble in my chest. Small, but relentless. I thought I was fighting for us. I didn't realize someone else was shaping the battlefield. The week before Thanksgiving, Evan sat me down on the couch like he was delivering bad news to a stranger. Not dramatic, not angry. Careful. His hands were folded together, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor instead of my face. That alone told me something was wrong. Evan always looked at me when things mattered. I love you, he said first. Those words used to feel like home. That night, they felt like a warning label. But I need space. My chest tightened. I remember the hum of the refrigerator, the street noise drifting through the window, the way my own heartbeat suddenly felt too loud for the room. What kind of space? I asked. A break, he said. Just for a month. Living separately. I need to figure out if I want to marry you for the right reasons. There it was. Marriage. The thing we'd talked about on that hike, the thing I'd assumed we were walking toward together, now framed like a threat instead of a future. He kept talking, words spilling out like he'd rehearsed them. He worried we were together out of habit. He needed to know if he could function on his own. He didn't want either of us to do anything stupid during the break. I stared at him, searching his face for something solid to hold on to. Is there someone else? I asked. No, he said immediately. Too immediately. Absolutely not. I nodded slowly, my hands numb. And then something in me hardened. After 5 years, I said, my voice quieter than I expected, if you're not sure about us, then maybe we shouldn't take a break. Maybe we should just end it. His head snapped up. That's not fair. This is just delaying the inevitable, I said. A break doesn't fix doubt. It just drags it out. We argued for over an hour that night, not screaming, sharp, controlled exchanges that cut deeper because neither of us raised our voices. He said I was making it harder than it needed to be. I said he was asking me to sit in limbo while he decided whether I was worth choosing. The argument didn't end when we went to bed. It followed us for 3 days. Short, tense conversations, long silences, eyes sliding past each other like we were already strangers. Thanksgiving dinner at his parents' house was unbearable. We sat side by side, polite and hollow, passing dishes and pretending nothing was wrong while my throat burned with everything I couldn't say. The following Monday, he came home and said the words that rewrote everything. We should break up. Our lease was ending in mid-December anyway, he said. Logistically, it made sense. He'd already found a studio across town. He'd move out on the 15th. I felt like I was watching my life being dismantled by someone else's checklist. We divided our belongings over 2 weekends. He took the couch we'd bought together. I kept the bed. He packed his kitchen things. I kept the TV. Each item felt absurdly symbolic, like proof that 5 years could be reduced to who gets what. By December 10th, he was gone. The apartment felt wrong without him. Too quiet. Too empty. I ate frozen dinners, standing at the counter. I stopped hiking. I stopped running. I went to work and came straight home, collapsed on the couch that wasn't ours anymore, and watched television until my eyes burned. My friends checked in. I told them I was fine. I wasn't. So when New Year's approached, I decided to fill the silence the only way I knew how, with noise. I threw a party. I invited friends, coworkers, and Tara. She'd been messaging me constantly since the breakup. Memes, check-ins, sympathy wrapped in humor. When I told her about the party, she said she had no plans and would love to come. The apartment filled up that night. Laughter, champagne, music thumping through the speakers. For a few hours, I felt almost normal. By midnight, most people had left. By 1 a.m., it was just the two of us, cleaning up empty bottles and paper plates. We sat on the floor, backs against the couch. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I didn't move away. We kissed. And in that moment, tired, lonely, still bleeding from a 5-year wound, I convinced myself that this made sense. That I was allowed to feel wanted again. That this was comfort, not consequence. I didn't know that the real reckoning was already on its way. And that it would arrive at my door, fists pounding, dragging the truth into the light, whether I was ready or not. Shock doesn't always look like screaming. Sometimes it looks like standing perfectly still while the world rearranges itself around you. After Evan stormed out of my apartment that Sunday morning, after his accusation-filled eyes burned through me, after Tara's voice turned defensive, after the door slammed so hard the frame rattled, I stood in the middle of the living room and couldn't move. The air felt thin, like I had to consciously remind my lungs to work. Tara stepped toward me, her hand hovering near my arm. Hey, I didn't expect that. He's clearly unstable right now. I flinched at the word unstable. Don't, I said quietly, taking a step back. She frowned, confused, or pretending to be. We should talk about what just happened. I need you to leave, I said. Her eyes widened. What? Why? Because the room still smelled like her shampoo, because my chest hurt in a way that felt different from heartbreak, sharper, more ashamed. Because for the first time since the breakup, I felt something click into place that I didn't like at all. I need to be alone, I repeated. She hesitated, then gathered her things with stiff movements. Before she left, she tried to hug me again. I turned away. The door closed. Silence rushed back in. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from her, then another, and another. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat down on the couch and replayed the last 6 weeks like a film I'd been too distracted to actually watch. Evan's sudden distance in August, Tara's perfectly timed message in September, her careful words at the coffee shop, her request that I not tell him, the way she always seemed to know what he was thinking, the way she framed my efforts as smothering. I felt sick. Had I been played? Or worse, had I let myself be? I tried to call Evan that afternoon, straight to voicemail. I texted him, hands shaking, asking if we could talk. No response. Days passed like that, me reaching out, him staying silent. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind cycling through the same questions. Did I emotionally cheat? Was I wrong to move on so fast? Did I actually move on? Or did I just cling to the first thing that numbed the pain? I opened my messages with Tara and scrolled slowly. She'd initiated almost every conversation. She'd always appeared right when I felt weakest. After an argument, after a lonely night, after a moment of doubt. Her sympathy had felt like a life raft. Now it felt like a hook. By the end of the week, Evan finally replied, "Come by Saturday morning. We need to talk." I showed up at his studio with coffee from his favorite place, hands cold despite the cup's warmth. He didn't invite me in right away. We stood in the doorway, the space between us loaded with everything we hadn't said. Inside, the apartment was barely furnished. Boxes stacked against the wall, a mattress on the floor. He looked exhausted, older somehow. He sat on the couch, I sat on the floor, and then he started talking. He told me about his parents' marriage, how his mom had depended on his dad for everything, how she'd lost herself, how watching that scared him, how, over time, he'd started seeing patterns in us that reminded him of them. He talked about money, about how I'd taken over finances because he asked me to help, and how he'd slowly stopped paying attention altogether. About how comfortable he'd become letting me handle everything. He talked about cooking, about how I used to cook every night and how he'd stopped trying, about how he worried he'd become someone who just took. "I didn't know how to talk to you about it," he said, voice rough, so I talked to Tara. There it was. He admitted she'd suggested a break, that she'd framed my resistance as control, that she'd pushed him toward ending things entirely. "I realized too late that she was playing both of us," he said, eyes wet. By then, I'd already destroyed everything. I handed him my phone. He read my messages with Tara in silence, jaw tightening. When he finished, his hands were shaking. "I was naive," he said. "I threw away 5 years because I listened to the wrong person." I asked him what he wanted now. He hesitated. "I want us back, but I don't know if that's possible." I didn't answer right away, because love doesn't erase damage, and forgiveness isn't a reflex, it's a choice. One I wasn't sure I was ready to make yet. Getting back together didn't happen with a kiss or a promise. It happened with conditions. We sat on the edge of Evan's couch, the space between us smaller now, but still guarded, like neither of us trusted the floor beneath our feet. "I won't talk to Tara ever again," he said first. "I'll block her on everything." "I need the same from you," I replied, my voice steady even though my hands weren't. No explanations, no closure messages, just gone. He nodded without hesitation. "And we can't rush into getting engaged," he added, "not until we fix what broke." That part hurt more than I expected, but I understood it, or at least I told myself I did. So we agreed to try again, slowly, carefully, like people rebuilding something fragile with glue that hadn't dried yet. At first, it felt like relief. We didn't move back in together right away. I stayed in our old apartment. He stayed in his studio. We spent weekends together, cooked, hiked, laughed in small, tentative ways that felt borrowed rather than owned. For a while, Tara disappeared, or so I thought. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a message from Evan while I was at work. "Did you see this?" Attached was a screenshot. An Instagram post. A photo of Tara and me from New Year's Eve. Us standing close, champagne flutes raised, the lighting just intimate enough to imply something more. The caption was vague, suggestive. Another post followed, a photo of us sitting on my couch. Another from the week after, coffee cups on the table, my apartment unmistakable. None of the photos were inappropriate, but they were intentional. My stomach dropped. I don't even have Instagram anymore, I typed back quickly. I didn't know she posted anything. Within hours, Evan's phone started blowing up. Friends asking questions, coworkers whispering, his younger sister calling, confused, asking if he and I were actually back together or if I'd already moved on. And then came the part that tipped everything over. Evan went to HR. He filed a complaint, not out of revenge, but because Tara worked in the same department as him, because she saw him every day, because what she was doing wasn't just personal anymore. It was professional harassment dressed up as nostalgia. The investigation took weeks. Evan had to give statements, screenshots, timelines. He showed them the messages where Tara had given him relationship advice, the ones where she'd contacted me during our relationship without his knowledge, the posts that made it impossible for him to do his job without whispers following him down the hall. Other coworkers were interviewed. By the end of it, HR made their decision. Tara was transferred to a different department, different building, no more overlap, no more proximity. Evan, unexpectedly, was offered a promotion. Senior role, better title, raise. He accepted. I thought that would be the end of it. But damage doesn't always stop when the threat is removed. The real escalation wasn't Tara. It was what happened after. The codependency issue, the one that had triggered everything, never actually resolved. Evan still didn't want to look at our finances. When I suggested we sit down together, go over bills, learn together, he said he'd think about it. Then he didn't bring it up again. So I backed off. I stopped planning every weekend. I asked him what he wanted to do instead of suggesting things. Sometimes he decided. Sometimes he shrugged and told me to choose. When he stayed at my apartment, I cooked. When I stayed at his, he ordered delivery and joked about his tiny kitchen. I offered to cook anyway. He waved it off. It was subtle, but it was familiar. Eventually, I realized the apartment itself was part of the problem. Every room carried the echo of the breakup. His studio felt temporary, cramped, like a holding cell between decisions. So I brought up finding a new place, somewhere neutral, somewhere fresh. He hesitated. His lease didn't end until July. I told him I'd pay the penalty to break it early if he wanted. He agreed. We started house hunting in March. City apartments, suburban houses, places that looked like new beginnings on listing photos. He fell in love with the house 30 minutes from downtown. Yard, garage, 3 bedrooms. More expensive than our old place, but manageable with my salary and his raise. We made an offer. It was accepted. I paid 2 months' rent to break his lease. He moved back into my apartment temporarily, and we both hated every second of it. The memories felt louder than before. We closed on the house in May. We painted together, bought new furniture. He set up a small office in one of the spare bedrooms. From the outside, it looked like recovery. From the inside, something was still unresolved. Bills started piling up on the kitchen counter because neither of us touched them. Eventually, I paid them like I always had. He saw me do it. He didn't comment. When I brought up engagement again in June, he said he wasn't ready. By July, we were good, mostly. Hiking again, Sunday dinners, family visits. But the thing we'd promised to fix? We never talked about it. We just learned how to step around it carefully. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, I wondered whether we were healing, or just getting better at avoiding the wound. By August, the honeymoon period of recovery had worn off completely. The house we had painted together now felt like a cage lined with quiet tension. Every time I walked past the kitchen counter cluttered with unopened bills, my chest tightened. I tried to remind myself, it wasn't the money, it wasn't the tasks, it was the control, or lack thereof. The fact that Evan, my partner, my fiancé, the man I'd imagined a future with, still relied on me to hold the pieces together, emotionally and practically, left me feeling hollow. I remember one evening in particular. I had just returned from work, tired but hopeful that we could spend a quiet night cooking together. I found him sprawled on the couch, his laptop open, fingers tapping absent-mindedly. I suggested we prep dinner. "I don't feel like it," he said, eyes not lifting. I blinked. The words were simple, casual even, but they landed like a punch. All the progress we'd pretended to make, the apologies, the promises, the careful boundaries, felt meaningless in that moment. I wanted to shout, to shake him, to make him understand the weight of the past 6 months, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I felt a cold, sinking solitude settle in my chest. That night, I walked through the rooms of the house, each one echoing with memories I hadn't wanted to face. The spare bedroom, the one we'd promised to turn into an office, reminded me of our temporary apartments, of the heartbreak and the mess with Tara. The living room, freshly painted, reminded me of laughter that had come too late, of the trust that had been broken quietly, methodically, by someone who claimed to be helping. Even the kitchen, which smelled faintly of the vegetables I had chopped earlier that day, felt like a battleground. I sat on the couch, my hands resting in my lap, and let the tears come. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, rolling down my cheeks, a slow acknowledgement that we weren't okay. That 5 years of love, care, and shared plans could still leave me feeling abandoned. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was shallow, fragmented by dreams of betrayal. I woke up in the night, drenched in sweat, heart racing, replaying conversations, trying to untangle where we had gone wrong. Tara's messages, Evan's half-confessions, the way he had slipped into avoidance instead of accountability, it all spiraled in my mind like a storm I couldn't weather. Even the people who were supposed to be my support felt distant. Friends asked if I was okay. I lied. I said I was fine. Because how could I explain the quiet devastation of someone who loved deeply, yet was repeatedly sidelined by circumstance, miscommunication, and outside manipulation? Worst of all, I began to doubt myself. Maybe I had pushed too hard. Maybe I had misread the signs. Maybe the love I thought was enough simply wasn't. I caught myself lying awake thinking, what if I ruined us? What if this is all my fault? For the first time, I felt the depth of being truly alone, not physically, not entirely, but emotionally. I was surrounded by walls, possessions, memories, and yet none of it could protect me from the sense that everything I had built with him was fragile. That perhaps, despite the apologies, the reunions, the house, and the promises, we were already broken beyond repair. I realized that I couldn't fix this on my own. I couldn't negotiate trust or repair love through patience alone. The weight of betrayal, both real and perceived, pressed down so heavily that I felt myself at a precipice, fragile, depleted, teetering between hope and surrender. And yet, somewhere beneath the exhaustion and despair, a spark remained, quiet, small, a whisper that refused to die. I can survive this. I will survive this. I am worth more than this pain. It was the only thing that made me lift my head, wipe my tears, and take a shaky breath. Because if I didn't, the darkness would consume the love, the life, and the future I was trying to reclaim. The turning point came quietly, almost imperceptibly. I was sorting through old messages from Tara, not out of curiosity, but out of a need to understand everything that had happened. Each notification, each carefully worded text traced the invisible lines of influence she had over Evan's decisions. And the more I read, the more it became clear. This wasn't random chaos. It had been orchestrated, subtle, calculated, but unmistakable in hindsight. That realization hit me like a shockwave. I sat on the edge of our bed, phone in hand, staring at the screen. My chest felt tight, my fingers trembling. The betrayal wasn't just from the breakup. It was from the manipulation, the way my life had been nudged, prodded, and reshaped without my knowledge. All the late nights Evan had come home distant. All the arguments that escalated because Tara planted seeds of doubt. It made sense now. I could see it. Every detail lined up. And then, as if timing had decided to test me further, Evan came home. He found me on the bed, phone open, eyes red from staring too long. I held up the screen. Look, everything she's done. It's here. She was playing both of us. He read through the messages, expressions flickering across his face. Shock, regret, disbelief. His hand shook as he scrolled. He looked at me, and for the first time in months, he really saw me. Not the broken, apologetic girlfriend. Not the forgiving, tentative partner. Just me. Clear, composed, and unwilling to be manipulated anymore. I didn't know, he admitted. His voice was quiet, raw, full of shame. I thought I was protecting you. Or myself. I don't even know anymore. I don't even know. I shook my head slowly. It doesn't matter what you thought. It matters what you did and what you're willing to do now. I realized then that I had a choice. I could continue to spiral in the aftermath, let the past dictate my emotions, or I could reclaim agency, refused to be defined by others' manipulation, refused to let Tara's interference or even Evan's mistakes control my life. I asked him one simple question. Do you want us to move forward, for real? He nodded, but I could see the hesitation, the fear. It wasn't enough to just say yes. Trust had to be rebuilt. Boundaries had to be set. Patterns had to be broken. I handed him my phone. I want transparency. I need honesty. And I need you to show me, not just tell me, that this is different. He agreed. Blocked Tara on every channel. Deleted any lingering connections. We talked for hours, laying out rules, expectations, and fears. We acknowledged the codependency issues we had ignored for months, the financial management, the planning, the little habits that made one of us feel powerless. We agreed to share responsibility equally, to communicate openly, and to respect each other's space without letting distance become silence. That night, as we sat on the couch, shoulders touching but not yet entwined, I felt the first flicker of hope. Not naive hope, not the reckless hope of denial, but steady, deliberate hope, the kind that comes from seeing clearly, understanding the forces that tried to control you, and deciding to take back your own life. It was empowering. I realized something crucial. The past 6 months hadn't destroyed me. They had clarified who I was. Strong, capable, perceptive, and unwilling to be sidelined by fear or manipulation. I could forgive Evan, but forgiveness would come on my terms. I could rebuild our relationship, but it would be with boundaries, honesty, and mutual respect. And most importantly, I could move forward without resentment eating away at me, without Tara or anyone else controlling the narrative of my life. For the first time in months, I felt grounded. I had been at my lowest point, teetering on despair, wondering if love and loyalty were worth the pain. Now, I understood that the pain had been a teacher, and like all lessons that leave scars, it also left strength. Ben kamoon tiptok fan tip tauhom? The weeks that followed the turning point were tense, meticulous, and strangely liberating. Tara never reached out again. Evan had blocked her on everything: phone, social media, even work channels when possible. The transfer HR arranged moved her to a different department across town, effectively removing her from our immediate lives. The air felt lighter, just knowing her influence had ended. Yet the real fallout wasn't about her anymore. It was about the consequences of what had already happened, the chaos she had set in motion, and the trust that had been fractured. We had to navigate the social aftermath first. Mutual friends had witnessed snippets of the drama. Some had taken Tara's side unknowingly, assuming the worst about us. Gossip had spread quickly. Evan's sister, college friends, and even a few co-workers had questions. Some were accusatory, some simply confused. Each conversation required careful explanation, boundaries, and, at times, silence. I remember one Sunday morning, Evan and I sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, laptops open but untouched, coffee in hand. "People are still talking," he said, a tinge of frustration in his voice. "I know," I replied. "Let them. They don't get to rewrite our story. Not anymore." He nodded, but I could see the tension in his jaw. The fallout wasn't just social, it was emotional. Months of manipulation, misunderstanding, and mistrust had left us both cautious, hyper-aware of each other's moods and reactions. Every smile was measured. Every casual comment double-checked. Every gesture weighed. And yet, despite the vigilance, something remarkable happened. The truth started working in our favor. Tara's reputation suffered quietly but decisively. Friends who had once taken her side began noticing inconsistencies. Her carefully curated social persona faltered as the narrative of her manipulation became clear to those she had tried to influence. Meanwhile, Evan's colleagues, seeing his commitment to transparency and professionalism, began offering subtle support. Those who had doubted our story slowly adjusted their perception. Even within our relationship, the fallout forced us to confront lingering issues head-on. We revisited the codependency problem we had ignored for so long. We discussed finances openly, divvied responsibilities equitably, and set up systems so neither of us felt powerless. Sunday cooking nights were restructured. Sometimes we cooked together, sometimes one of us took the lead, sometimes we ordered in, but we always checked in about preferences and boundaries. It wasn't perfect. Some days, resentment flared. Old patterns resurfaced like weeds, but every time we paused, talked it through, and reminded each other of our goals: respect, trust, and partnership. And the house itself became a symbol of new beginnings. Moving into a home that neither of us associated fully with the trauma allowed us to reclaim space, physical and emotional. We painted the walls together, bought furniture, set up separate workspaces. It was ordinary work, domestic work, but the ordinary became extraordinary because it was ours. Even more importantly, the fallout extended to Tara's interference in our personal lives. Evan and I developed an unspoken agreement to protect our relationship from outside influence. Calls from friends with helpful advice were filtered. Opinions from work acquaintances were heard, but weighed cautiously. Social media became a controlled space rather than a battleground. Every external trigger was met with a choice: panic or perspective. We chose perspective. By the end of the summer, months after the initial chaos, something remarkable had happened. The trust between Evan and me, though still healing, was stronger than it had ever been. The drama, manipulation, and betrayal hadn't disappeared, but they had served a purpose. They forced honesty, confrontation, and accountability in ways that comfort alone never could. I walked through the living room one evening, watching him chop vegetables while I set the table, and realized that the weight of the past 6 months was lifting. The storm had passed. The air was clear. The world wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I didn't need to rewrite history. I just needed to reclaim it. Months later, as I sit in our sunlit kitchen, watching Evan sip coffee across from me, the chaos feels almost unreal, as though it happened to someone else. The apartment smells faintly of baked bread. Laughter drifts from the living room where we've set up a small reading corner, and for the first time in a long time, I feel entirely grounded. We are married now. The wedding was small, intimate, just the people who mattered most. No drama, no lingering ghosts of Tara or miscommunication. We pledged ourselves with full awareness of the past, aware of our weaknesses, and willing to confront them together. We still have issues, the occasional tension about finances, the old patterns that creep in, but we meet them with patience, discussion, and empathy instead of avoidance. The lesson this entire ordeal taught me is deceptively simple but profoundly hard won. Trust is built slowly, shattered quickly, and rebuilt intentionally. It's not about perfection. It's about accountability, boundaries, and honesty. Not just from a partner, but from yourself. I've learned that pain doesn't always come from betrayal alone. It comes from ignoring the subtle shifts, the seeds of doubt, the whispers that go unchecked. And I've learned that stepping into your own power, even when the world seems against you, is the only way to preserve your self-worth. I think about Tara sometimes, and I feel no malice. What happened with her taught us to be vigilant, to communicate clearly, to never let outside influence erode the foundation we've built. And I think about the 5-year journey with Evan, the heartbreak, the missteps, the lessons learned. It has made us stronger, more aware, and more intentional in our love. The future feels open now. We are talking about starting a family next year, about shared responsibilities, shared joys, and shared lives that no one else can dictate. I've realized that happiness doesn't come from avoiding conflict or shielding yourself from disappointment. It comes from confronting reality, making conscious choices, and loving deliberately despite past wounds. Life has a way of testing us, of breaking what feels unbreakable and forcing us to rebuild stronger than before. The heartbreak, the manipulation, the emotional chaos, it all shaped me into someone resilient, grounded, and capable of thriving in love without losing herself. And that is the gift of the storm. It teaches you who you are, what you will accept, and what kind of life you are willing to fight for. Sometimes the hardest chapters write the strongest characters, and now I finally understand how to tell my own story.